The year is 1999, it's the final year of the 20th century. Manchester United become the first English club to win the treble, back when they were a good club, let's just quietly ignore who finished bottom of the league that season, and Ford completed their takeover of Jaguar towards the back end of the year. I wonder how well that went. The year would also see a great season in Formula 1, as it saw an amazing title fight between the McLaren of Mika Häkkinen, who was looking to retain his crown from 1998, and the Ferrari of Eddie Irvine, who became an unlikely contender for the title after stepping up to be the number one at Ferrari, following Michael Schumacher's crash at the British Grand Prix, which took him out for 6 races. The fight would go all the way to the final race at Suzuka, where in a weekend which saw Irvine strangely off the pace at a circuit he had been strong at in previous years, it was Mika who would come out on top, winning the championship by 2 points ahead of Irvine after coming from a 4-point deficit heading into the finale. However, what if I told you that this title decider came close to not happening, thanks to something that happened at the previous race, which nearly saw both championships being wrapped up with a race to spare? This is the story of Ferrari's near disqualification at the Malaysian Grand Prix. The Malaysian Grand Prix at the Sepang International Circuit would play host to the penultimate round of the 1999 World Championship, and it would mark the first ever time that F1 would race in Malaysia. God, I wish Sepang was back on the calendar. After a disastrous race for both Häkkinen and Irvine at the Nürburgring, with the pair only being able to recover to 5th and 7th respectively, Häkkinen led the championship by 2 points ahead of Irvine with 2 races to go and had a slim shot of winning the title at Sepang. But if he wanted to do that, he would need to win the race, but he would have great difficulty doing that, as along with it being the first ever race at Sepang, the race also marked the anticipated return of Michael Schumacher, who after initially deciding that he wasn't going to return until the first race of the year 2000, was persuaded by then Ferrari president Luca de Montezemolo to return for the final 2 races, in order to not only aid Ferrari's chances of winning the Constructors, but also help Eddie Irvine's chances of becoming the first Ferrari driver since Jody Scheckter in 1979 to win the driver's title. The idea of Michael playing second fiddle to another driver, geez, I can't imagine it. With Michael making his return at Sepang, there were naturally questions being raised as to whether he would be on the pace straight away, given he had not driven an F1 car in over 3 months, with the only preparation he had being a couple of private tests at Fiorano. But any doubts people may have had were quickly faded away, as in qualifying, Michael in his first race back would take pole position ahead of his teammate Eddie Irvine, with the gap between the pair of them being just under a second, with the highest placed McLaren of David Coulthard being under 1.2 seconds adrift of Michael's pole time, with Mika a further 600ths behind. Even with his legs not being 100%, Michael still proved he was the best driver in the world at that time and was levels above everyone else. But even with this impressive pole lap, he knew the role he had to play come race day, with some even speculating whether he would actually play ball or not to Eddie. But come the race, we would get an answer, as after the 2 Ferraris were able to fend off the 2 McLarens at the start, with Mika having to fend off from the Stewart of Rubens Barrichello, Michael on lap 4, after initially pulling away, would back off to allow his teammate Irvine to take the lead, with him being tasked with holding off the 2 McLarens. This initially would backfire though, as David on the following lap would barge his way through on Michael at turn 2 to grab second place, with Mika nearly following through on the approach to turn 4, only for Michael to break that little bit later to fend off the flying Finn. David would then start to reel in on Eddie, and it was looking like that he would grab the lead off the Ferrari driver. However, on lap 14, David's race would come to an end, as he was forced to pull off at the start of the support pit straight due to an issue with his fuel pressure, allowing Michael to take back second place and allowing Eddie to have a comfortable lead up front. With Eddie on a 2-stop and Michael on a 1-stop, Eddie would continue to pull away, whilst Michael would do a brilliant job in fending off Häkkinen, who, like with Eddie, was also doing a 2-stop, but would be going a lot longer than Eddie. Eddie would rejoin behind both Michael and Mika after his second stop, but would assume second when Mika made his second stop on lap 47, which saw him rejoin behind Johnny Herbert Stewart, but he would get the Brit a few laps later to take back third. Michael, as he did on lap 4, would allow Eddie through to take the lead, and with them having a comfortable gap to Mika, the pair would cruise to an amazing 1-2 finish, with Irvine taking victory ahead of Michael by just over a second, with Mika being a further 8 seconds back in third. The 1-2 finish, combined with DC's retirement, allowed Ferrari to turn an 8-point deficit on McLaren and the constructors into a 4-point lead heading into Suzuka, with Irvine taking the lead in the championship ahead of Mika, also by 4 points. With Ferrari leading both championships heading into the finale, everything was looking rosy for the prancing horse as the team continued to celebrate the 1-2 after the race. However, a few hours after they won the race, their chances of winning both championships would take a hammer blow. 3 hours after they won the race, it was revealed that both Eddie Irvine and Michael Schumacher had been disqualified from the Malaysian Grand Prix, giving Mika Häkkinen the victory, and with it his second world title, with McLaren retaining their constructors' crown from 1998. The reason for their disqualification was because of a technical infringement with their car's bodywork, specifically the bargeboards. Bargeboards are still used in F1 today, as you can see from the image on your screen right now, and what the bargeboard's main purpose is to help get air to go underneath the car at a quicker rate in order to aid downforce and reduce understeer on the front end, hence why it's also known as a turning vane. Nowadays, bargeboards are integrated into the car's bodywork. However, back in the late 90s and even throughout the majority of the 2000s, the bargeboards often stuck out like a sore thumb and were often very visible to the naked eye by fans watching on TV or even in the grandstands. The issue with Ferrari's bargeboards on this occasion was that it was deemed to be below the tolerance that was allowed by the regulations. Before each race begins, every car is scrutinised by the FIA to ensure it conforms to the regulations, and this includes any bodywork that the car may have, including the bargeboards. Then, after a race is finished, every car gets weighed and measured again to ensure it has still conformed to the regulations and hasn't been tinkered in any way. And to account for any bodywork that slightly moves due to bumps, curves, or even uneven surfaces, if that makes any sense, there is a tolerance that teams can fall back on in case this happens. In the case of the bargeboards, the tolerance was 5mm, which equates to 0.5cm. However, when the FIA technical delegate Joe Bauer measured the Ferrari's bargeboards after the race, he found that the bargeboards were 10mm lower than what the regulations allowed, which, when you take the tolerance into account, is another 5mm below the threshold. Joe then reported this to the stewards 2 hours after the race had concluded, and then a further hour later, after Ferrari were brought into the stewards' room to explain themselves, the verdict was officially out for the world to see, officially ending Ferrari's hopes of winning both championships once again. Or so we thought. You see, whilst Ferrari accepted Joe Bauer's findings, they felt that something was a bit off with his measurements, as when they measured it after the bargeboards were handed back to them, they found it to be 4mm below the required measurement, which, when you add the tolerance, puts them 1mm above the 5mm threshold. Having doubled, tripled and quadruple checked it several times to make sure it read the same measurement, Ferrari lodged an appeal against the steward's decision just before the hour window to lodge an appeal came to a close, and it would be heard a few days later at the FIA Court of Appeal in Paris. Representatives of Ferrari were obviously there, along with representatives for both McLaren and Stewart, who were there to try and make sure the original verdict stood, given in McLaren's case it would ensure that they would win both championships, whilst in the case of Stewart, who assumed second and third places after Ferrari's disqualification, would help their cause in claiming fourth in the constructors in their fight with Williams. A version of the bargeboard that was used in Malaysia was presented in front of the appeal board, and it was during this hearing that a live measurement of the bargeboard took place, where in the process of the measurement it was discovered that Joe Bauer had indeed measured the bargeboard incorrectly, and that Ferrari's measurements after they got the bargeboards back were correct all along. And so, on the 23rd of October 1999, nearly a week after the original verdict was released, it was announced that Ferrari had won their appeal against the steward's decision, and that the points that they had originally accumulated from the race had been reinstated, along with the original result. As a result, it meant that the championship, to Ron Dennis's annoyance, was still alive heading into Suzuka, and it meant that Mika had to come from a 4-point deficit if he wanted to retain his crown from 1998. And unfortunately for Eddie, that's exactly what he would do, as Mika would win his second world title thanks to him winning the race and Irvine being way off the pace in third compared to Mika and Michael, who were flying out in front, which has often led to conspiracy theories that Michael didn't try hard enough to get Mika simply because he wanted to be the one to break Ferrari's driver's title drought rather than Eddie. But personally speaking, and if anyone has watched my video about track invaders, you'll know that I don't believe in conspiracy theories, and the same applies here. Besides, if that was the case, then why on earth did Michael help him at Sepang? Besides, Suzuka is usually a tough track to overtake on anyway. On the topic of theories, I don't also for 1 minute believe that this was down to Ferrari international assistance, or even the idea that they overturned the results in order to have a title decider like some people in the media were suggesting.
There was a complaint afterwards. The stewards decided to disqualify the two drivers who had won, both Ferrari drivers, and the driver who came third, Mika Häkkinen, was promoted so that he won the race. And that meant that Mika Häkkinen then gathered enough points to win the whole championship, which would have been terrible. So what they have decided to do is to reinstate those two results from the Kuala Lumpur Grand Prix.
And I've just given people an excuse to shout British bias in the comments. God damn it, JW. Anyways, back on topic. The reason I don't believe these two theories is simply because, as mentioned earlier, the FIA did the remeasurements right in front of everyone who attended the hearing, including McLaren and Stewart, who were both still upset with the verdict, even though the proof was in the pudding. I get that it was self-interest why they were unhappy, but come on, it's not like it made a difference to Stewart in the end. They were still able to grab 4th from Williams, who were literally a one-man team that season. For McLaren though, the verdict did actually affect them, as although Mika was able to retain his crown from 1998, McLaren couldn't do the same in the constructors, as thanks to David having a horror show in Suzuka, Ferrari were able to win their first constructors crown since 1983, winning by 4 points ahead of McLaren. So in that respect, you can kind of understand McLaren's annoyance with the verdict, as without it, they would have won the constructors title instead of Ferrari. But unfortunately for them, they would have to wait another 25 years before they could win the constructors title again. McLaren would try to do a similar thing a few months later in 2000, when at Interlagos, David Coulthard would get disqualified for a technical infringement on his front wing. But unfortunately for McLaren, their appeal would end up failing, as unlike Ferrari's appeal in '99, the measurement on Coulthard's car was actually correct, on top of the fact that ever since that incorrect measurement in '99, the FIA put procedures in place to ensure a similar incident didn't happen again. So yeah, not a good look, it must be said. So that was the story of Ferrari's near disqualification from the 1999 Malaysian Grand Prix. Let me know your opinions about the whole fiasco in the comments below. I'd love to hear your point of view on the whole thing. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week for another F1 video, this time going through my predictions for the 2025 Formula 1 World Championship. So hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss that, and until then, take care.